Hello fiber friends, my name is Melissa and I am the artist behind Wish This World Felted Fiber Arts, and today we're going to discuss how to make some cork and felt coasters. This will be a wet felting technique, and there is no kit for this yet. If there's interest, maybe I'll make a kit, but honestly the materials are pretty easy to come by for this project, so I think you'll be able to do it on your own. And before I actually jump into how to make everything, I do want to spend a quick moment to discuss the why we would want to use felt as a coaster. Felt is not only absorbent, so it'll help protect your table or whatnot from the moisture condensation in your drink, but it also is good at holding in heat. So you could use this as a trivet and kind of protect your countertop from a pot as well. The cork in the middle is sort of a, in a sense it's unnecessary because cork is also absorbent and will protect your surface from heat. The reason why I combine the two is that I get sort of a solid, object instead of a felt sheet, which could be kind of limp unless you make it super duper thick. And it also just gives us some structure to work around. This is probably the most beginner friendly wet felting project I could possibly imagine. So that's why we're doing it that way. Let's discuss what you'll need to do this project. For our fundamentals, you're going to want a water safe surface, and then you're going to want a no slip covering. So my water safe surface is a piece of plastic cardboard, corrugated plastic if you will. You can get this at most hardware stores. And then this is no slip shelving liner. I think you can also get this at hardware stores. I got mine at Walmart. I've also seen it at the dollar store. So there's plenty of options to get some no slip grip in your life. Aside from that, you're of course going to want to have some cork for this. You can order it off of Amazon, find it at craft stores, also sometimes available at hardware stores. And a quick note, most cork tends to be stained, like with a wood stain, to make it a more pleasant brown color. And that can get in the way of your felting if you choose to use a very light color. So I have pre-rinsed mine. I soaked them in hot water and I actually ran them through the washing machine, my clothes washing machine, to help get out the excess stain, because it is, at least on this brand, it is water soluble and will get into my wool. Speaking of wool, you can use almost any kind of wool roving. Roving refers to the fact that it's kind of more of a rope with hairs in it instead of a bat, which would be more of like a sheet. I prefer to work with merino wool. I just like the softness of it, and I do so much felting that when I work with like Corandel or any of the rougher sort of breeds, I can feel it on my hands. But anyways, any wool will shrink, really. But my preferred wool is merino wool. Now the next thing you're going to want to consider is your soap. You can actually use almost any soap. Like dish soap will work, bar soap will work. You probably want to stay away from like hand gel soaps just because they're going to be really rough on the wool, but you could use those too. Foaming soaps, any of those. The most highly recommended type of soap would probably be an unscented, undyed olive oil soap. That's sort of the gold standard. You can tell that this is definitely dyed, and it is scented as well. As long as you choose your soap well, the scent and the dye doesn't really matter. You'll wash that out later anyways. And I prefer to support small businesses. My bar soap comes from Royalty Soaps, which is a YouTuber that has much more presence on this platform than I do, but I really enjoy using her soaps. They have a high oil content, so they are softer on my skin, and all her colors are made with micas instead of like a gel or a liquid colorant, and micas will wash out of wool like no problem. You're gonna also want a water bottle, just room temperature, plain water, nothing fancy there. You're also gonna want to have some hot water, or at least warmer than room temperature water, off to the side. And then last but not least, as an optional item, you may or may not want to have some mesh. If you get mesh, you're going to want to find one that's not a natural fiber, acrylic, synthetic, some sort of non-natural. And the reason for that is that wool will try to felt into your mesh as well. And it's less likely to do that with a synthetic. If you have like a cotton mesh, like say a cheesecloth, it's going to combine with your wool and you're never going to get back out again. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it with or without the mesh, because personally, I use mesh on much bigger projects, but for coasters, I don't normally use this stuff, but I'll show you both ways. Okay, so let's start with the mesh technique first. It's almost exactly the same as the not mesh technique. What the mesh will do is it will protect your project from you. When wool has not been fully felted, when it's not combined together yet, it'll be very sensitive to movement and rubbing, but you have to move it and rub it to get it to felt. So the mesh kind of creates a sort of, protective layer to keep all the fibers in while you do your thing. So I've just laid a piece out. I'm going to throw my cork down in there, kind of maybe a little off center to where the mesh is. This is a clearly bigger, piece than I really need. I will fold it over to do the other side. You could also have two tiny pieces of mesh and sandwich it together. Doesn't matter. So first up, I'm just going to spritz my coaster ever so slightly with some water. The water will kind of help the fibers stay on the coaster, or rather the cork part of our coaster, instead of floating off into the air, because they're going to be very light. We're going to work on very thin layers. So now we're going to add some very thin layers of wool. And I mean super thin. So I'm going to kind of grab these edges here. I'm not even grabbing like the main hunk of roving here. I'm just going to grab the edges with my fingers kind of pressed against the palm of my hand here. And I'm going to pull out just that, little wisps, tiny amounts. This is going to be the hardest part for beginners, is getting just a tiny bit of wool out at one time. And when we do this, we're just going to kind of shingle it across, making sure that we go past the coaster a little bit. And I did it here. I'm also going to go down and do it here. Notice this is so thin, you can still see the coaster through it. And that's good. We're going to build up layers. And now I'm going to take some more wool and I'm going to crisscross it. Go in the perpendicular direction, if you will. And this will make a nice sort of solid structure for the wool to felt into. Just like that. Easy peasy. Now we have our mesh, so we're going to fold it over and we're going to hold this here and just flip the whole thing over. Ta-dum! And we're going to ever so gently undo the mesh, because that wool is so fresh right now, it's going to want to stick to everything. Now that we're on the other side, we're going to want to fold our wool up. And it's sticking a little bit because my coaster's wet, but we can make it stick even better if we spray this down. There we are. We're just gonna lightly fold it over. It is gonna wanna stick to your hands. If it does, right now it's cooperating pretty well, but let's just say this piece was sticking to my fingers. I could actually give it an extra spritz to weigh that little bit down, and it'll kind of stay right where it needs to be. And I'm actually gonna give this just a light coating of water so that I can start the next layer. For the next layer, we're gonna do the same thing. If your roving has like little extra tall parts, just kind of focus on those first, you know. Be content with some really tiny, tiny pulls, and then it'll even back out so that you can kind of grab more in one go. And I'm just going to tile this all over again. Really easy. Dun dun dun. Making sure we go the other way, and we're overlapping our layers just a bit. You see that this isn't even very precise. This is why I think it's such a beginner friendly project. And I don't have to do that, but I wanted to. Anyways, now that that's on there, we're just gonna fold it again, support the coaster, and flip. Lay that back down, unwrap it, and we're just gonna fold everything back up again. And we're gonna repeat that, whatchamacallit. We're gonna do it twice on each side. I think a lot of felters will do like a third layer, but I don't really find that it's necessary for me personally. So now it gets super repetitive, and I might go ahead and just fast forward all of this. All right, so we have put 2 layers on each side, folding all the extra fiber back over the edges to the other side. Now it's time to actually felt it. So we're gonna go ahead and cover this again, protect it from ourselves. We're gonna grab our soap out, which mine is still in a fresh package, so I have to actually get it out of there. And then what I like to do is I just lay it on top. We're gonna add some extra little bit of water and then slick it up into our hands. And we're gonna pat it down into our piece, being pretty gentle. I think I might need a little more water. So let's go ahead, just add a little bit there. And we're not gonna rub real hard, even with the mesh there. We wanna have a soft touch. Think about, you know, if you have a sunburn and you're rubbing your lotion onto the sunburn, you're not gonna wanna press super hard or rub really fast, right? So it's kind of about that level of action. And once it starts to leave trails, like you can kind of see the soap has foamed up a little bit into the mesh, we're gonna go ahead, flip it over, make sure that side is nice and wet, and we're gonna add just a little bit more soap to the other side. Same sort of thing, nice and gentle. And you can tell that you've gotten the soap worked through because it's foaming up. It's creating bubbles inside the mesh. There's sort of that whitish layer now. We're gonna wanna pull off our mesh just to make sure it's not sticking. Doesn't seem like it is. Let's check our other side. Yep, nice and unstuck. That's the way we like it. So now that we've got that in there, we can start rubbing just ever so slightly more. And we're gonna go kind of mixing it up, clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise again, counterclockwise. This is a small test in patience, especially when you're doing it with the mesh. Let's go ahead and flip it. Clockwise, counterclockwise, clockwise, and counterclockwise. And the reason why we switch directions, you can also go sort of side by side and then up and down, is that the wool will felt. It'll shrink in the direction that it's rubbed. So if you only rub in one direction, it'll be strong on one side and very weak on the other side. And after we've done that for, I don't know, a couple of minutes, maybe even just only a minute, I'm not quite sure. I've never timed it. We're going to lift this up. And I can tell already this is a little tiny bit stuck to the wool. Not too bad. So it's a good thing that we have lifted it up. And we're going to want to flip it and make sure that other side is not stuck as well. And again, you know, with the artificial synthetic mesh, you're limited on how stuck it'll get, but it'll still get a little bit stuck. And let's see here. This is starting to get solid enough. Let's do one more pass. Soap up and rub in all sorts of directions. Now this mesh has done its job. It's protected the wool from me. So now we need to kind of work on the edges here. That's really hard to do with the mesh, so you're probably safe with pulling this out at this point. It's still very delicate. You're not going to want to go too crazy. So we're just going to kind of slide our finger across the edge here. Nice and easy. Then I'm going to flip and slide my finger across the edge again. And this does the same thing. It's basically changing the direction that I am pushing from. Now this is starting to get a little firmer. It's starting to get close to what we want. So I'm going to remove my mesh and kind of utilize this non-slip surface that we have here. If you need to, you can re-soap up. Not always necessary, but sometimes it's good practice. And now that it's a bit felted, it is partially felted or pre-felted, I can start rubbing harder. And I'm actually pushing this down into my no-slip mat ever so much. And I'm going to keep doing that, maybe lifting up once in a while to feel the edge here. Make sure that's also felting in. But I'm going to just keep doing that until all the wool gets really tight. You know, when you first start felting, it's going to kind of feel like just a loose pillowcase of wool. But once you've done a lot of felting, it will start to feel very secure. It's not going to move around much. Right now it's still moving around a little, but it's pretty solid. That's when we're going to want to pull in our warm water. Warm water will felt faster than cold water. And the only reason why we didn't start with this is that the one downside to warm water is that it also opens up all the fiber, so you can actually sort of unlayer your piece if you do it too soon. So it's all warm, and now I'm really gonna go to town here. Rub, 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 rub. And yeah, that's about it. That is now a coaster. So I'm just kind of checking my edges, making sure there's nothing that's super loose, doesn't feel like it. If you are done, you've made one coaster and you're not making any more, soak this in some cold water and then rinse it out, and then soak it in some more cold water with just like a couple of tablespoons of vinegar, and you'll be good to go. The reason why we use vinegar, if we can, if you don't have that, I didn't list it on the ingredient list earlier. All the vinegar does is it sort of neutralizes the last little bit of soap and helps all the wool fibers to kind of close in on themselves. But even if you just rinse it really well, you're probably going to be okay. Air dry this for a couple of days. It'll stay wet for a bit, and you're done. And now we're going to go ahead and do the version with no mesh. It's essentially the same process. The only reason why I really feel a need to show this to you is that I don't use mesh when I'm doing coasters. So I felt kind of weird using it, but it's definitely super important if you make something bigger like a scarf. So I sprayed it down, and I'm just going to do the same thing I did before, right? We're just going to shingle all that stuff. This is a bit thick, so I'm going to tear that and thin it out. You really want to have thin layers. If you have thick layers, like if you take a big old clump of this and you just throw it on there, that clump is going to want to stick together for like ever. So you're going to have kind of like a rope effect going on in your felted piece, because those chunks will want to stay together. And we're going to go the opposite way here, making sure that we go past the edge of our coaster, right? There we are. Nice little layers. Now, I'm going to really get this wet. I need to get it more wet than I did it before, because I'm going to do this without the mesh. And when I do that without the mesh, I'm going to grab both two edges, like opposite ends, flip, and just sort of swoosh my hand towards the center of the cork. And we're going to go ahead and lay this down again, just like before. Get that nice and wet. And I'm going to show you one more time before I speed everything up here. So shingling. I have a little bit of an extra bit here, so I'm going to do some thin ones to kind of even that back out. Like so. Go the opposite way. Very easy stuff, man. Like, you have to have some patience to do this, but easiest felting project ever. Get it nice and wet. And you're going to want to kind of tuck your fingers in and just flip with confidence right there. And you notice I kind of like move my hands towards the center. And that's how I get it to unstick when I do that. All right, so now I've got to do this one more time on each layer. I'm going to fast forward through that, and then I'm going to show you how I do the rubbing with no mesh. Okay, so without the mesh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure my hands are super duper soapy. I'm not even using the spray bottle here. Super soapy. Okay. And then when I lift this up, you can kind of feel that it's a bit like wet paper. It's sort of the consistency right now, because we haven't done any rubbing yet. So you just kind of want to be, gentle, but we're going to hold it in our hands and flip and kind of feel where all the loose edges are. Now, the first couple of times you do this, especially if you're used to using mesh, it's going to kind of feel like, why am I not just using a protective layer? But when you start doing 10 of these, 12 of these, 100 of these in a day, this is going to be a lot faster, because you can kind of feel where all the loose parts are and kind of concentrate on those right away. And it's still a very light touch, just the, lotion on your sunburned skin or rubbing your baby's bottom, something like that. Very, very light touch. But other than that, just keep yourself soapy. You're going to have to develop a feel for it. It's not something I can train you for. But already, we're past the stage where I have to be super gentle. I'm kind of pushing harder, moving it faster. And it is going to felt much quicker this way. So this is why I prefer not to work with the mesh, because I can feel it out. But you may have to play with that personally, especially if you're very, very new to felting. Use the mesh. Why not have that safety feature installed? And I'm going to just keep rubbing, and essentially this part is now all the same as what we did before. Once I start to feel it kind of be firm, I can go ahead and go down onto my no-slip mat and give it that extra bit of friction to make sure it felts faster. If you do a lot of these in a row, you may need to warm up your water or add some fresh hot water to your supply. This is pretty close to room temperature now, so it's not going as fast as it could, but not really worth a water change for one little piece. And voila, we have a coaster. Again, you're going to want to rinse it out, soak it a bit, and then soak it in some vinegar water to help neutralize the soap, and air dry flat if you can. Thank you for watching this video. I hope it was informative. If there's something I do that you want to see a video for, let me know. I won't be updating super often, but I will try to keep the channel alive, so to speak. That's all for now. I'll see you next time.